of the Spectre book had some thoughts about maybe at least referencing the Sentinels of Magic somewhere within his book. But it's one of those concepts which didn't really bear any fruit in the end. All right, the next major story arc in JSA had a lot going on. A lot. The original Star Spangled Kid, Sylvester Pemberton, reappeared thanks to an anomaly in time. As well, Dawn Granger, the female Dove from Hawk and Dove, was revealed to be alive and well. And she provided a pretty important revelation about Hank Hall and the Monarch. But two highlights of this major arc are, one, the reappearance of the terrorist organization Cobra, and as part of their campaign of terror, they engineered the explosion of a plane. One of the passengers on that plane was the mother of Al Rothstein, or Adam Smasher. The second big plot thread going on throughout the story arc was the return of Extant, one of the villains from Zero Hour. Of course, he was the one who used his time-based powers to age the majority of the original JSA members to proper chronological ages, forcing them to either retire or, in some cases, driving them to their graves. In terms of Alan's involvement in this story arc, he didn't have quite so leading a role as he did in the Darkness Falls story arc. This was one story arc in which a number of the JSAers got a good share of screen time. So Goyer and Johns really couldn't let any one particular character take the lead, especially since this arc was a way of, in the end, thinning out the membership. This arc ended with the departure of the Jack Knight Starman. Queen Hippolyta also made the decision to return to Themyscira to focus on her royal duties. As well, Dr. Fate would take some time away from the group as he learned that his wife, Lita Hall, was still out there somewhere. What really caught my eye in the story arc was in the battle between the JSA and Extant. This was all about the JSA giving Extant what for what he did to the society back in Zero Hour. But what was really neat was this was, I would say, the first time in which Alan manifested the suit of armor worn by the Alan Scott who appeared in Kingdom Come. Of course, after the 52 weekly event, it would be revealed that the Kingdom Come reality took place on Earth 22. But here in this story arc, it was neat to see, quote unquote, our Alan, who was still tall, lean, full head of hair, wearing that Kingdom Come suit of armor, and it looked less bulky on our Alan, again, our in quotes. It just showed how good a costume that is, and it was certainly set a precedent as in different stories over the years Alan would be seen donning the Kingdom Come suit of armor. All right, the next story arc I want to talk about was titled Injustice Be Done. This was a 5-issue arc, which you can find in Volume 3 of the JSA Trade Collections. They cover does carry the title of The Return of Hawkman. So you get 2 full story arcs within this one volume. Injustice Be Done featured the return of the Injustice Society, or rather a new Injustice Society for the modern generation, but led by longtime JSA villain Johnny Sorrow. Now, in between the first couple of story arcs of JSA, there was this amusing one-issue story in which Wildcat was on his own on monitor duty back at the JSA Brownstone, and he was still recovering from his wounds, which were incurred in the Justice Be Done arc, but still having busted ribs and an arm in a cast. He was still able to fend off the Injustice Society, but here in Injustice Be Done, they came back with a retooled lineup, and this time they weren't playing around. They were going for blood. And as would happen in other JSA arcs, the villain team started by taking down Alan, who was as established by Jack Knight in that first arc, Justice Be Done. He was the big guy. Alan was the powerhouse of the team. And again, in that first arc, it was established that Alan still had his weakness to wood. And here in Injustice Be Done, in the opening chapter, one of the Injustice Society members would shoot Alan in the chest, more specifically through the heart, with a wooden bullet that was fashioned from a piece taken from fellow Injustice Society member Blackbriar Thorne. And you could see that this was incredibly painful for Alan. He was shot right through the Green Lantern logo on his chest, which corresponded with his heart. And he was already erecting a whole wall of green flame, but being shot through the heart, and then also being impaled by Blackbriar Thorne, just took him out immediately. And it was very clear that if Alan did not get to a hospital soon, he would die. And so Mr. Terrific and a couple of other JSAers would rush Alan to the hospital. I'm just going to take another brief pause just to turn to the right page, because there was some very important dialogue on Mr. Terrific's part as it related to Alan. Figured you folks didn't want to hear all this page flipping going on in the background, but I found it right now. So it was Mr. Terrific and Star Spangled Kid who rushed Alan to the hospital, and they managed to take off his shirt and his cape, his midsection, rather his upper torso, heavily bandaged, but you could still see that there was green Starheart energy coming from Alan's chest. And Mr. Terrific, of course, called on a doctor to start up an IV immediately. He had the whole plan of action for Alan, and when the doctor said, well, you can't just barge in that way, Mr. Terrific proceeded to tell the doctor that Alan is a living legend. More to the point, Mr. Terrific said that Alan was potentially the most powerful human in the galaxy. The only thing containing that green flame leaking from his chest was willpower. And Mr. Terrific explained that if Alan were to die, everybody would be looking at a metahuman meltdown that could take out the entire solar system. So that was enough to scare the doctor into getting Alan treated right away. So that dialogue was just really important because it established just how powerful Alan was. And it was also becoming increasingly apparent that Alan wasn't just channeling the larger part of the star heart, which was still located at the farthest reaches of the universe. Rather, he had a measure of the star heart within him. And so that made him incredibly powerful. And also, it made for an incredible danger in that if Alan were to die, it wouldn't just be a case of him expiring. There would be a massive release of energy. And this idea that Alan wasn't just channeling the star heart, but was actually carrying it within him, that was something that was being established during the post-Zero Hour years, where in stories like Green Lantern, Sentinel Hearts of Darkness, Alan appeared to expel or release part of the star heart into the cosmos in an effort to try to not look so young anymore, also to have a greater level of control over the energy which he was channeling. And Goyer and Johns are certainly planting a major seed here that would play out in a future story arc. Suffice to say, for the rest of Injustice to be done, Alan was pretty well taken off the table. One of the chapters actually featured a really neat story that flashed back to the Golden Age, so readers still got to see Alan at the time when he was Green Lantern, when he was in his youth. And then towards the end of Injustice Be Done, there were a couple, actually, of important scenes with Alan. The Hal Jordan Spectre was involved in the Injustice Be Done story arc. Hal as the Spectre took a fair beating from the Injustice Society as well, but in the end, he was able to help the JSA take down the rest of the Injustice Society. And then what was really nice was that even though the Spectre said that his role in this whole event was finished, from the way the dialogue is laid out, it's clear that Hal was speaking at this point and saying, but I still have one more stop to make. And near the conclusion of Injustice Be Done, we see Hal as the Spectre enter the hospital room, and after the doctor and the nurse have left, Hal, as the Spectre, places his hand on Alan's chest and heals Alan's wounds. And then makes a quick departure. The Spectre actually smiles, an honest smile, before disappearing, but Alan is left wondering if there was somebody in the room there with him. There's also a touching scene between Alan and Jade, where Alan is visited at home by his daughter, and Jade, of course, is amongst many who have no idea how Alan recovered so quick. And also important to note, this was a guest artist for this particular issue. I do want to say, or maybe not. No, that looks like Steven Sadowski art there. But Alan looked a fair bit younger in this scene with Jade at his bedside. And we see that Alan is actually quite troubled. He's looking out the window and he's saying, I've escaped death so many times. Jade, I'm sorry your brother couldn't do the same. It's up to Jade to say to her father, well, he's not dead, Dad. Todd and I share this kind of connection. And she shares with her father that she feels that Todd is still alive and that he's out there somewhere.